Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm here to talk about more dark fiction, so horror thrillers, and all of the dark stabby things that I enjoy to read. Once again, you can probably hear it in my voice, but I'm still sick, but I'm determined to film because despite not feeling amazing, I'm still reading, and so I want to keep up with my wrap-ups, and so once again, I'm here to share some good recommendations, including a very popular book that I thought I was going to hate and ended up really enjoying. I always have really unpopular opinions, so it's pretty refreshing for once to finally be going along with the crowd, and I can't wait to tell you all about it, so let's get started. So starting with that popular book I was just referencing, let's talk about Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I got my hands on a copy of it and got to check it out. This, of course, is the story of a young man who goes about helping an elderly gentleman after he hurts himself. So he not only takes care of the man, but also his dog, and then eventually takes responsibility for the dog itself. This is a book that is a horror book with elements of fantasy, and I have always been very hit or miss when it comes to Stephen King. I do not hate him, but I also fully admit that there's many of his books that do not work for me. I know he's so beloved in the horror genre, and I appreciate him and actually love several of his books, but I'm always very cautious when it comes out with a new one. I purposely don't spend my money to buy his books because I just don't necessarily know if I'm going to love them, so I don't pre-order them at least. But this one worked very well. So at the beginning of the book, the part where we have this young man interacting with this kind of curmudgeonly old grumpy man, I just thought that their back and forth, their relationship was just so delightful. I thought it was very authentic, and I definitely can see why so many people love Stephen King's character work. There's also a dog element, which I enjoyed, but I admit I don't have a dog myself, so I think for those of you that are pet lovers, you will really connect with that element of the story because there's this older German Shepherd that's very much in the forefront of the story, and I quite enjoyed this one. It does take a turn partway through the story where it kind of takes more of a fantasy twist with the horror elements, of course, and I feel like people aren't saying too much about what that twist is, so I'm going to keep it kind of vague, but I will say that I did enjoy the twist. It definitely hit on a lot of the fantasy tropes that I personally really enjoy. It reminded me just vaguely of so many other books like Neil Gaiman that I've read before, and I think that if you enjoy kind of motifs or nods to fairy tales, as the title suggests, that I really like what this book is doing. There's kind of references to evil monsters and princesses and all of those kind of ideas. And so again, it's very tropey, or at least it addresses a lot of tropes, but it does so in a way that didn't feel tired. It felt very fresh and smart and very much making nods to those tropes rather than just simply reusing them. I do admit that I felt the book started to drag towards the middle to end section, and I don't even mean that as too much of a criticism because I say that about pretty much every single Stephen King book. I just think that he needs to be edited down. I do have a preference for shorter horror, and so this one was just a little bit longer than I would have liked. It still ended up being a 4-star read for me. I do recommend it. I thought it was fantastic. I could definitely see myself rereading it. So yes, I do recommend this one. I thought it was very well done, and whether or not you're like myself and are kind of hit or miss with Stephen King, if you share my taste, I think that this one is just really gonna have good appeal. I think again, it's one that's just very palatable. There's nothing really in this book that is going to turn off certain readers. I think that it's just, again, like the author, he knows what he's doing. He knows what people want to see. And this book felt nostalgic. It's definitely a coming of age story, but it was really cool because it's actually set in a very near modern day. And I really like that because it's weird to have a book that is so modern and yet so nostalgic all at the same time. And yeah, I really do see the appeal of why people love Stephen King. So I'm slowly working through his collection and trying to find which ones work for me. Next is The Devil Takes You Home by Gabino Iglesias, and this is a book following a Latin American man who is living with his family. He finds out that his daughter is sick with cancer, and so because of them living in the States, it's very expensive to pay and cover all of her bills, and so he ends up turning to a life of crime in order to help finance her health bills, and so he ends up working as a hitman. This book gave me heavy vibes of Blacktop Wasteland, so if you love that book, I would definitely recommend checking out this book as well. Unfortunately, I did not like Blacktop Wastelands, and it's not that I thought it was a bad book, it's just one of those like classic crime action books that reads like a classic crime action movie, and it's just not my taste. So while I like thrillers, I tend to like more psychological thrillers, and this one is just straight up action. My real complaint about it though is the fact that the character development just didn't make sense for me. I'll admit the first chapter totally pulled me in, again, I was very sympathetic of a young father trying to care for his daughter, that feeling of helplessness, all of that. I think that made sense. But then like within a chapter, he just reaches out to a friend and becomes a hitman and has virtually no remorse and just completely falls into that life. And I just felt like that transition happened way too quickly. It's a very short book, and so I felt like the author was just trying to get to like the good parts, but it fell flat for me. I didn't think that it worked on a character level, and I'm just not enough of an action reader to really appreciate this one. Next up, we have When the Night Bell Rings by Joe Kaplan. This is a book that I received for review from the publisher Camcat Books, and this is a very classic horror story in terms of its narrative structure. The story is told over two timelines, one being back in, I believe, the 1800s, and there is this curse or these monsters that roam at night, and then we follow characters also in the present day where possibly the same curse or supernatural entities are back again. And within the story we have the past, and then we also get to have the diary entries, so we kind of get to see how the two storylines connect. I don't read a lot of like historical horror, so I was a little bit nervous going into this one, but I was actually pleasantly surprised. I found the writing to be very consumable, very digestible, and just again very easy to follow. So while this book is based off of classic narrative tropes, when it comes to horror, I felt like while it nods to more of those kind of classic stories, this one is just very consumable for a modern audience. So I was pleasantly surprised how much I liked it. Again, it wasn't going to be a 5-star read for me, simply just knowing my taste in books, but I think it hit the tropes, it did it well, it was easy to follow, the characters were likable. And so I do recommend it if that sounds up your alley. If you're someone who just loves, again, a very traditional horror narrative, this one might be one you want to check out. Next, we have The Butcher and the Wren. This is a 2022 thriller release that follows a few different perspectives, one being a serial killer who is doing, well, what serial killers do. And then we also follow a group of detectives that are trying to hunt this man down. This is a very classic serial killer narrative, and I'll be honest, I think I'm going to step away from reviewing these books for the next while, just because I'm finding that my review feedback on all of these are kind of the same, and that's the fact that I feel like all of these books are kind of the same story over and over again, and I'm definitely getting tired of them. I didn't have any specific problems with this one, but I didn't feel like it brought anything new to the genre. Honestly, the reason I picked it up is again because I'm trying to read as many new releases as possible before the end of the year as I prepare my best of the year content, so I want to at least check everything out, see if it's going to be a favorite, and unfortunately, spoiler for that video, this one is not going to make my end of the year top 10 list. It was fine, but nothing special. Then I read Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak, and this is another 2022 release that I picked up largely because I had a lot of people drop comments in my previous videos wanting me to check this book out. A lot of you really like this book or simply wanted my opinion on it. And so this is a thriller that follows a young woman who is a recovering drug addict. She at this point is actually far along into her recovery and is now trying to make a life for herself. She gets the wonderful opportunity to work as a nanny for a young boy. The parents of this boy are quite rich, and so it's actually a really good gig. She gets a place to live, she has a well-paying job and all of that, and she really likes this young boy. However, as the title of this book nods to, this young boy has this strange habit of writing these, or drawing rather, these really unusual pictures, and the pictures just tend to have some really creepy, strange imagery within them. And then within the story, this young woman ends up enlisting the help of a young boy that she kind of has like some interest in, so kind of tropes right there. But together they start to investigate that there is this old myth about a woman who was, back in the day, stolen away. And so there's different kind of nods to, is this like from the past? Is there a ghost going on? And so I won't spoil it. I won't give anything away, but it's kind of one of those books that walks the line where you as a reader are trying to figure out, is this a thriller book? Is this a horror book? Is there actually going to be a supernatural element? And I did really like that because I'll be honest, I didn't fully know where this book was going until it got there. And the ending did surprise me in a way that I didn't see the full thing happening. The ending itself is perhaps a little bit controversial. I think depending on how much you read into it, you can interpret some things as being just potentially not the best representation if it is trying to do what other people are suggesting it is. I'm mixed on it, so usually I try to form a final opinion before I film a video like this, but I'll say that the ride was really fun. I really enjoyed the pictures. You know me, I'm actually a huge fan of audiobooks, but this is the case where I'm definitely glad I read a physical copy of the book because getting to see the pictures on the page made such a difference. I feel like people who listen to the audiobook are going to completely miss like a whole part of the story. As for the ending, I think it was fine. I don't think the author was trying to do anything controversial. I just think they were trying to think outside the box and just didn't give a lot of thought to some of the repercussions of what they're trying to imply in the story. So maybe I'm giving the author a little bit too much of a pass. I didn't see the story as overly problematic, but I'm also not the own voice's perspective of what other people are nodding to. I know April from Getting Huggy With It made a video about this recently, so you can check out what she thought about it. And she was kind of in the same boat, saying, you know, it's kind of tough if we're not necessarily the audience that is potentially needing to have feedback on this book. Anyway, I'm being super vague. It's so hard to talk about thrillers without giving away plot, which makes me perhaps a terrible booktuber, but I really lean on the side of telling you less and just giving you more my opinions rather than plot points. Anyway, moving on. Next, I want to talk about Forsaken Country by Askin, who is one of my favorite crime fiction writers, and so I basically at this point have to read everything that he puts out. This is a book that is part of a larger companion series, so it does briefly mention the events of the previous books that will spoil one of the other books and major plot points for you. I'm going to talk about this really spoiler free, but just know that while I highly recommend Askin, you actually would want to start earlier in this series. But in this particular one, we pick up with a detective that we met before. He is living in an isolated cabin and is kind of just living away from everyone else after the events of the other book, which again gets spoiled at the beginning, so keep that in mind. But in this book, he is reached out to by a man who is trying to track down his daughter. The idea is that his daughter, who is a woman now, has run away, but they actually believe that her husband, or kind of ex at this point, is responsible for that, so they enlist this detective to help them track him down. I thought the plot was really compelling, but what really worked for me was the character work, and that's something I love so much about Askin. What I like about him as a crime fiction writer, which I've said before, is that he writes an incredible range with his work. So some of his books are very character driven, some of them are more fast-paced thrillers. He wrote one that I particularly love that's more of a legal thriller, and so they all have a different angle, and in this one especially, I think his character development really shines. I love the main detective. I love the other perspectives. You get to see kind of the difficulties and challenges of trying to investigate domestic abuse charges and all of that. So I thought it was very well done, very nuanced. The author himself has a background in criminal proceedings, and so you can definitely see that in his work. And so I thought this one was super topical, super well done, and at the core of the story, again, was just a really compelling thriller. So I highly recommend this one. But again, if you're not caught up in a series, go back to the beginning and start all the way from there. Go through them all. They're fantastic, and then end up reading this one, his newest release, which was so good. And finally, I got to read Liminal Zone by Junji, which is a collection of 4 short stories. So it's actually a pretty short read, but I really loved all of the stories. I thought especially the 3 of them were really strong for me. The 3rd one kind of went over my head. It was just weird, but that tends to be a good thing when it comes to Junji, that you just finish a book and you're like, what did I just read? So I like this book. Within one of the stories involves weeping women. It's very topical of some of the themes he likes to play with about hysterical women, and I think it's just very well done. My favorite in the collection was absolutely the one about the Catholic boarding school. I think that anyone who likes horror involving Catholic imagery and just kind of making and pointing fun, or just pointing, not even fun, but actually just like pointing a good criticism of the abuses of the Catholic Church, I thought this book was so on point. And there's one about a serial killer, which again, I kind of said I'm getting tired of the serial killer genre, but this one was so well done. So really enjoyed this one. It's solid. Yes, it's only 4 stories, but the great thing about that is that everything was really good in here. There really were no stories that I thought were like a flop or a miss. And so if you can get your hands on this one, highly recommend. I believe he already has another book out that's been translated, Black Paradox, but the wait list for my library is insane. So I probably won't get a chance to read it until 2023, realistically. I don't know when I'll be able to check it out, but I'm very happy I got a chance to read this one. Highly recommend it. I think it's one of my favorite collections. I did a whole video where I talked and ranked the first 15 short stories and collections that I had read by Junji, and I didn't include this book because obviously I hadn't read it yet, but I definitely recommend checking that out if you want to hear more of my thoughts on more Junji. All right, we've made it to the end of the video here. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, opinions on the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, and sometimes I read some true crime, and I definitely hope you stick around because my best of the year content is basically coming out now, and so if you stick around, you're going to have lots of recommendations for my favorite books, both backlist titles and and new releases in all the genres I read. And so if you want to help me out with this video here, you can give me a thumbs up, share it around online, drop a comment, even if just a little emoji like, oh, I don't even know, a ghost maybe, that would be great. And then if you want to help me out more, you can hit that little notification bell. That way you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.